I never thought my 65th birthday would feel like the loneliest day of my life. I whispered to myself as I carefully arranged the last of the helium balloons in my living room, each one a soft pastel shade meant to bring warmth to the celebration I had envisioned. The table was set perfectly, white linens folded crisply, a homemade chocolate cake waiting in the center with "Happy 65th Birthday, Mom" written neatly in blue icing, candles lined up like tiny sentinels ready to light up the room with joy. I had spent weeks preparing, choosing the menu, decorating with fresh flowers from the local farmer's market, and even picking out a playlist that mixed my favorite jazz with some classic pop that my grandchildren usually loved. I had invited everyone in the family, sending personalized cards that I had written by hand, making sure each message conveyed just the right mix of love and excitement. I imagined the laughter, the stories, and the gentle teasing from my sons and Jessica, my daughter-in-law, about my inability to follow modern trends, and it made me smile as I thought about the warm feeling that always came from being surrounded by my family. I checked the clock again, sipping on my coffee as the minutes ticked past, the house still eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you start questioning whether your invitations were ever received. I tried to reassure myself, thinking maybe traffic was heavy or someone was caught up at work, but as the hour stretched on, unease started to settle into my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. I pulled out my phone to call Jessica, hoping for a quick on-our-way message, but there was nothing except a brief text saying she was busy with errands and would come later, though she didn't mention anyone else. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting a soft glow over the empty chairs and the carefully arranged place settings, and I realized that the joyous day I had envisioned was slipping further away with each passing minute. I wandered from room to room, straightening a napkin here, adjusting a balloon there, my heart heavy with a strange mixture of disappointment and the quiet, aching hope that perhaps they were on their way. And then I noticed it. A small note tucked under the vase of daisies, the handwriting familiar yet unsettling in its casual tone, a message from Jessica explaining how she had other commitments and wouldn't be joining, leaving a subtle implication that none of the family would attend either. The words hit me with the sharpness of ice, and a quiet anger began to simmer beneath the surface, mingling with the hurt that had been growing ever since the first guests failed to arrive. I sank into the armchair, looking around at the empty room that smelled faintly of vanilla frosting and lilies, and allowed myself a long, steadying breath, acknowledging the sting of betrayal from someone I had welcomed into my home with open arms and trust. Even in the absence of anyone else, I decided to take a small walk in the backyard, the cool evening air brushing against my skin, letting the quiet whisper of wine through the trees remind me that though the celebration had not gone as planned, I still had my dignity and my mind to plot a way to face this unexpected family disappointment with grace. I spent the evening reflecting on every little kindness I had offered, every effort I had made to keep family bonds strong, and realized that this quiet solitude was giving me a chance to understand not just the absence of others, but the presence of betrayal that had been lurking beneath the surface all along, a realization that would guide the choices I was about to make in the days ahead, as I prepared to confront the truth and reclaim the sense of respect and love I deserved. As the evening settled into a quiet hush, I found myself sitting by the large bay window in the living room, staring at the faint glow of streetlights and the shadows they cast across the empty driveway. The house, once filled with chatter and laughter, now felt unusually still, and each tick of the clock seemed louder in the silence. I could not help but replay the events of the day over and over in my mind, examining every detail and trying to understand the choices that had led to this moment of solitude. The disappointment and sense of abandonment weighed heavily on me, but beneath it, a curiosity began to take shape, a desire to uncover the reasons behind the absence and the subtle changes in behavior I had observed from Jessica over the past months. I remembered small incidents that, at the time, had seemed insignificant, little excuses, missed visits, and half-hearted apologies, and I realized now that these were early signals of a shift in dynamics, a gradual distancing that had escaped my attention until the stark contrast of today brought it into sharp relief. Determined not to be passive, I decided to begin the process of gathering clarity, first by reviewing the messages, emails, and notes I had received, looking for patterns, inconsistencies, or hints that could explain the sudden distance. As I read through each line, a picture began to emerge, not one of malice but of priorities that did not align with the values I had tried so hard to nurture in our family. I noticed the subtle emphasis on convenience, efficiency, and personal gain in her communications, a focus on what suited her schedule and her plans, often at the expense of shared family moments that I had cherished. The realization was bittersweet. It confirmed the sense of betrayal that had been growing quietly in my heart, yet it also provided me with the knowledge needed to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. I took notes, making careful observations about timing, tone, and context, understanding that these details would be crucial in addressing the situation without creating unnecessary conflict. In the quiet of my study, I allowed myself to acknowledge my feelings fully, recognizing that disappointment, sadness, and even anger were natural responses to unmet expectations and broken trust. I also reminded myself of my own strength, the resilience that had carried me through numerous challenges in life, from personal losses to professional obstacles, and I realized that these qualities would guide me in navigating this familial tension with grace. I began to plan small, deliberate steps to reclaim a sense of control and dignity, starting with setting boundaries and clarifying expectations for future interactions, making sure that every action would be measured and intentional. As the night deepened, I prepared a list of topics I would address when the time was right, including the importance of communication, respect, and honoring commitments, with the goal of fostering understanding rather than confrontation. I also reflected on the power of patience, knowing that immediate resolution was unlikely, and that careful observation and timing would be essential in influencing the outcome constructively. By the time the house was enveloped in the stillness of late evening, I felt a sense of quiet determination, a readiness to face the challenges ahead with poise and insight. I understood that while today had not gone as I had hoped, it provided an opportunity for growth, clarity, and ultimately, a chance to strengthen the relationships that truly mattered. The shadows in the room no longer felt oppressive. They seemed to hold space for reflection and strategy, a reminder that even in moments of solitude, there is room to reclaim strength, assert boundaries, and prepare for meaningful dialogue with those who had unintentionally or carelessly allowed distance to form between us. With that thought, I rose from the chair, straightened the table settings, and walked slowly through the quiet house, each step a reaffirmation of my resilience and a commitment to navigate the coming days with intelligence, dignity, and a steadfast sense of self. The next morning, sunlight streamed gently through the sheer curtains, casting a warm glow across the living room where the remnants of yesterday's preparations still lingered. The table neatly reset and the balloons slightly deflated but still colorful, and I moved quietly around the house with a sense of purpose, determined not to let disappointment define the day. I started by making a simple breakfast, brewing a fresh pot of coffee and toasting slices of bread, arranging everything on the counter with a small vase of fresh daisies to keep a sense of cheer in the space. I reflected on the events of the previous evening, considering the subtle changes in Jessica's behavior and the way she had prioritized her own schedule over family gatherings, and I realized that addressing these patterns required a thoughtful approach rather than a reaction born out of frustration. I decided to begin with small gestures, reconnecting with my own sense of calm and reinforcing the atmosphere of home as a place of warmth and consistency, showing through actions rather than words that respect and consideration are foundational to any relationship. As I tidied the living room, I reviewed my notes from yesterday, highlighting key observations about timing, communication patterns, and responses, all of which could help me understand Jessica's perspective and prepare for a conversation that could lead to clarity and resolution. I considered inviting her for a casual breakfast or coffee, a neutral setting where the focus could be on discussion rather than confrontation, and where the tone could remain light yet meaningful, creating an opportunity to express feelings and expectations clearly. While preparing the table, I thought about the ways I had contributed to fostering family bonds, the traditions I had maintained, and the support I had provided over the years, and I acknowledged that these actions had value, even if they had not always been fully recognized or reciprocated. I allowed myself to feel the mix of emotions, sadness for the unmet expectations, a quiet frustration at the absence of attentiveness, but also a growing determination to address the situation with intelligence and composure, focusing on long-term understanding rather than immediate satisfaction. The smell of brewing coffee and the gentle morning light seemed to offer a renewed sense of possibility, reminding me that each day presented a chance to shape interactions constructively and reinforce boundaries, while maintaining a caring presence. I planned to observe and listen attentively, noticing nuances in tone, choice of words, and body language, which could provide deeper insight into intentions and priorities. and I reminded myself that clarity often comes from patience and careful attention, rather than hurried assumptions. As I set the last cup on the table, I envisioned a conversation where honesty and tact could coexist, where feelings of disappointment could be expressed without accusation, and where both perspectives could be acknowledged in a way that strengthens rather than divides. By mid-morning, the quiet house felt more like a space for reflection and preparation, an environment where I could cultivate inner strength, consider practical steps, and create the emotional readiness to address delicate family matters with dignity. I reminded myself that the goal was not to control outcomes but to maintain integrity, respect, and a sense of fairness, showing through consistency and calm resolve that family relationships thrive on understanding, accountability, and open communication. The gentle light of the day, the soft hum of the coffee maker, and the quiet rhythm of household routines provided a grounding presence, reinforcing my sense of steadiness and reminding me that, even in the wake of disappointment, thoughtful action and measured responses can guide interactions toward resolution, offering a chance for healing and a renewed sense of connection in the family over time. By mid-afternoon, the quiet of the house had settled into a comfortable rhythm, and I found myself sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook open in front of me, jotting down thoughts and ideas on how to approach conversations with Jessica and the rest of the family. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting gentle stripes across the countertop, and the soft ticking of the wall clock provided a steady background to my reflection. I considered the subtle patterns I had observed over time, the little moments when promises were delayed or forgotten, and the ways in which attention seemed to shift toward convenience rather than mutual care. I realized that understanding these behaviors required patience, careful listening, and a willingness to observe without judgment, focusing on facts rather than assumptions. I began planning small interactions, starting with friendly check-ins and invitations for casual moments together, choosing neutral settings like the backyard patio or a local cafe where discussions could flow naturally and comfortably. I reminded myself that creating a calm and welcoming atmosphere would make it easier to express feelings and expectations, and that the clarity of my own thoughts and intentions would help guide these exchanges with grace. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about the values that mattered most to me in family life: honesty, respect, and attentiveness, and I noted that reinforcing these values required consistent action and gentle reminders, rather than confrontation or criticism. I also reflected on my own contributions, acknowledging the ways I had nurtured traditions, celebrated milestones, and provided support over the years, and I felt a quiet sense of pride that these efforts had been genuine and well-intentioned. I considered the balance between offering guidance and maintaining autonomy, knowing that my role was not to control decisions, but to model integrity and encourage meaningful connection. By focusing on observation, reflection, and thoughtful communication, I could create opportunities for understanding and reconciliation, allowing the family to recognize the impact of choices without the need for blame. I spent time organizing my notes, highlighting key points to address and identifying moments when casual conversation could transition into deeper discussion, ensuring that the approach remained respectful and considerate. As the afternoon light shifted toward early evening, I felt a renewed sense of confidence, recognizing that preparation, patience, and composure would be essential tools in navigating delicate family dynamics. The house, once heavy with the memory of absence, now felt like a space of potential, a place where deliberate actions could foster connection, clarity, and mutual respect, and I was determined to use this time to cultivate understanding and maintain my own sense of dignity throughout the process. As the evening approached, I found myself arranging a small assortment of tea and snacks on the living room table, the soft clinking of porcelain creating a comforting rhythm against the quiet backdrop of the house. I paused to glance out the window at the fading sunlight reflecting off the garden, noting the gentle sway of the trees and the calm that seemed to settle over the neighborhood, a stark contrast to the emotional turbulence I had felt over the past day. I reflected on the importance of perspective, understanding that while disappointment and unmet expectations were natural, the way I chose to respond would define the tone of future interactions and the sense of harmony within the family. I made a mental note of small gestures that could convey warmth and consistency, such as preparing favorite foods, sharing stories from the past, and offering attentive listening, recognizing that these actions could bridge gaps without confrontation and encourage meaningful engagement. I thought about Jessica, considering the possible pressures and challenges she might be facing, and reminded myself that approaching the situation with empathy while maintaining clear boundaries would provide the most effective path toward understanding and reconciliation. I organized the living room, straightening cushions and arranging flowers in a way that felt inviting and intentional, taking satisfaction in creating an environment that reflected care, attention, and patience. As I sipped my tea, I considered how to introduce conversations that balanced honesty with tact, expressing my observations and feelings without casting blame, allowing space for reflection and response. I reminded myself that communication rooted in respect and clarity often leads to more productive outcomes, and that by remaining composed, I could set a model for others in the household, demonstrating that thoughtful engagement can foster trust and connection even after disappointment. I revisited my notes, refining points I wanted to share and identifying natural opportunities for discussion during the coming days, whether through casual moments at home or during brief visits, keeping interactions light yet meaningful. The subtle aroma of brewed tea and the warm glow from the lamp on the side table created a comforting atmosphere, reinforcing the sense that careful preparation and mindful attention to environment could support emotional clarity and readiness. I considered the rhythm of daily life, noting that routines, consistency, and attentiveness could provide stability that reassured both myself and others in the household, helping to cultivate a sense of mutual respect and understanding. As night fell and shadows stretched across the floor, I felt a quiet confidence, acknowledging the progress made in my own emotional awareness and strategic thinking, ready to approach conversations and family interactions with patience, dignity, and a commitment to constructive communication that honored both my feelings and the relationships I valued most. The following morning brought a soft, golden light through the windows, illuminating the living room where I had spent the previous evening preparing my thoughts and organizing the small rituals that had become comforting anchors in the wake of recent disappointment. I sat at the dining table, a cup of steaming tea in my hands, and reviewed the notes I had made, reflecting on every interaction, every pattern of behavior, and every subtle signal that had hinted at Jessica's shifting priorities and the growing distance between her and the rest of the family. I allowed myself to feel the weight of the emotions that had accumulated over the past days, disappointment, frustration, and a quiet sadness, acknowledging that these feelings were natural and valid, yet also reminding myself that they did not define my response or my sense of self. I considered the steps I had planned to approach the situation thoughtfully, focusing on clear, patient, and respectful communication, and I made a mental list of the key points I wanted to address, from the importance of mutual attentiveness to the need for consistent engagement in family traditions and responsibilities. As I prepared a light breakfast, arranging fresh fruit, toast, and a small bouquet of daisies on the counter, I reminded myself that small, deliberate actions often communicate as much as words, and that maintaining an environment of warmth and consistency could encourage openness and cooperation. I spent some time observing the quiet movements of the house, the gentle creak of the floorboards, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of birds outside, allowing these familiar, comforting details to ground me in the present moment and reinforce a sense of stability and calm. I thought carefully about Jessica, considering the pressures and challenges she might be experiencing, and I resolved to approach our interactions with empathy while maintaining clear boundaries, understanding that respectful engagement requires both awareness of others' perspectives and a steadfast commitment to one's own values. I reviewed my previous notes, identifying natural opportunities for conversation that could arise during casual moments, and I plan to use these times to introduce my observations and expectations without judgment, creating space for dialogue that could lead to understanding and collaboration. The sunlight shifted across the room as I tidied the living space, straightening cushions and organizing the table, and I noticed how these small acts of care contributed to a sense of order and reassurance, both for myself and for anyone who entered the home. I reflected on the lessons of patience and preparation, recognizing that meaningful change often occurs gradually, and that thoughtful, measured steps are more effective than immediate reactions driven by emotion. I considered ways to model respectful communication and attentive presence, demonstrating through consistency and calm resolve that family connections thrive on understanding, accountability, and genuine care. As the morning moved toward noon, I felt a growing sense of readiness and confidence, recognizing that my actions, guided by reflection and composure, could influence interactions positively and create the conditions for productive and respectful discussions. I planned to observe attentively, listen actively, and respond thoughtfully, ensuring that each engagement supported clarity, connection, and mutual respect, while preserving my own dignity and sense of self. I reflected on the broader significance of family bonds, recognizing that challenges and misunderstandings are a natural part of relationships, and that addressing them with patience, empathy, and clear communication strengthens, rather than diminishes these connections. By mid-afternoon, the house felt calm and purposeful, a space where thoughtful preparation and intentional actions could foster understanding, and I felt a renewed determination to approach each interaction with Jessica and the family in a way that balanced honesty, empathy, and composure. I reminded myself that progress is built over time, that clarity emerges through careful observation and reflection, and that maintaining integrity, patience, and thoughtful engagement would guide me toward meaningful resolution and deeper connection. The quiet presence of sunlight, the familiar household routines, and the gentle rhythm of my own thoughts created a sense of readiness, reinforcing the conviction that deliberate, respectful, and empathetic actions can transform moments of tension and disappointment into opportunities for growth, understanding, and lasting familial harmony. Throughout the day, I continued to prepare mentally and emotionally, visualizing conversations, anticipating possible responses, and planning ways to navigate them with poise, knowing that my measured approach would not only protect my own sense of dignity but also foster an environment where honesty, respect, and thoughtful dialogue could thrive, ultimately allowing for reconciliation, stronger bonds, and a renewed sense of trust and mutual understanding within the family. The afternoon sun poured through the kitchen window, casting a warm, inviting light across the countertops as I moved about the room, arranging the few remaining items I had set aside for a small family gathering I planned to host later in the week. I prepared a selection of light refreshments, carefully slicing fresh fruit, arranging cheese and crackers on a platter, and brewing a pot of herbal tea, paying attention to small details that would create a welcoming and comfortable atmosphere. As I worked, I reflected on the past week, the mixture of disappointment and insight that had shaped my understanding of the family dynamics, and the way subtle patterns had emerged in Jessica's actions and choices that suggested priorities misaligned with the values I had long hoped to nurture. I considered how best to approach the situation thoughtfully, planning conversations that would balance honesty with empathy, allowing for open dialogue while maintaining boundaries that preserve dignity and respect. I reviewed my notes once more, noting key points and moments that could naturally lead to discussion, and I reminded myself that the tone, timing, and environment of these interactions would be just as important as the content. I thought about the traditions I had fostered over the years, the small rituals that brought joy and connection to our family, and I realized that reinforcing these practices gently could serve as a bridge toward understanding, reminding everyone of the bonds that connected us even when disappointments occurred. While arranging the table and placing a small bouquet of fresh daisies in the center, I allowed myself to reflect on the power of observation and patience, knowing that taking the time to understand intentions and perspectives before responding would lead to more constructive outcomes. I considered Jessica's possible perspective, imagining the pressures, distractions, and priorities that might have influenced her behavior, and I resolved to approach the situation with empathy while remaining clear about my own expectations and the importance of mutual respect. As I moved through the living room and kitchen, straightening cushions and adjusting chairs, I noticed the sense of calm that came from creating an orderly, intentional environment, and I understood that these physical preparations mirrored the mental and emotional readiness I was cultivating within myself. I sipped my tea slowly, reflecting on the importance of consistency, attentiveness, and gentle guidance in fostering meaningful connections, and I plan to use casual moments during the upcoming week to introduce conversations that encouraged reflection, understanding, and collaboration. I reminded myself that the goal was not immediate resolution but gradual progress, fostering an environment where open, honest, and respectful communication could flourish. As the afternoon wore on, the sunlight shifting across the floorboards, I felt a quiet confidence settle within me, reinforced by the knowledge that deliberate, thoughtful actions combined with patience and empathy could influence interactions positively, strengthening family bonds while protecting my own sense of self and integrity. I reviewed the schedule I had in mind for the next few days, considering moments to check in with Jessica and other family members in ways that felt natural and unforced, ensuring that each engagement supported understanding, clarity, and mutual respect. By late afternoon, The house felt calm, purposeful, and prepared for the gentle unfolding of conversations and connections, a space where thoughtfulness, observation, and consistent care would guide the family toward a better appreciation of shared values, responsibilities, and the importance of presence, attention, and kindness in sustaining meaningful relationships. The quiet rhythm of the household, the carefully prepared environment, and my own steady focus created a sense of readiness, reinforcing my belief that through thoughtful planning, empathy, and clarity of intention, it is possible to navigate complex family dynamics and foster stronger, more respectful, and deeply connected relationships. Late afternoon settled into the house with a soft, amber glow, illuminating the corners of the living room where I had spent the better part of the week arranging and reflecting on the family dynamics that had emerged. I moved slowly through the space, adjusting cushions, straightening a small stack of books, and ensuring that the room felt welcoming and orderly, each gesture a quiet affirmation of control and care amidst the lingering sense of recent disappointment. I poured myself a fresh cup of tea and carried it to the bay window, watching the branches of the trees sway gently in the breeze outside, and allowed myself a moment to observe and process my thoughts. I considered the careful balance between patience and action, understanding that fostering communication and connection required both, and that the tone I set through composure and consistency would significantly influence how future interactions unfolded. I reviewed the notes I had kept over the past few days, organizing observations about patterns in Jessica's behavior, moments when attention shifted away from shared responsibilities, and instances where priorities seemed misaligned with the collective expectations of the family. I reflected on the importance of addressing these observations with clarity and tact, planning opportunities for gentle dialogue that encouraged understanding rather than confrontation, ensuring that every conversation maintained respect and dignity. As I tidied the kitchen counter and placed a small vase of fresh daisies by the window, I thought about the ways in which environment shapes interactions, recognizing that a calm, orderly, and thoughtfully prepared space could support meaningful conversations and help reduce tension. I planned small gestures that could reinforce bonds, from preparing favorite meals to initiating casual check-ins, each action designed to encourage openness and participation, while signaling the value of presence and attentiveness. I considered the possibility that Jessica's behavior might stem from pressures and commitments that I did not fully understand, and I reminded myself that empathy, combined with clearly defined boundaries and honest communication, could guide the interactions toward productive outcomes. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant chirping of birds, and the subtle creaking of the floorboards provided a steady rhythm, as I reflected on how thoughtful observation and careful timing could allow for meaningful exchanges without escalating conflict. I visualized conversations unfolding naturally, moments where shared memories or common interests could open dialogue, and I considered how to articulate my perspectives on family responsibilities and the importance of mutual consideration in ways that invited reflection rather than defensiveness. I sipped my tea slowly, feeling the warmth of the cup and the calm it brought, and allowed myself to plan the sequence of interactions that could gradually foster understanding and reinforce the sense of connection within the family. I reflected on the lessons I had learned over the week, that patience, attentiveness, and empathy, combined with deliberate and thoughtful action, create the conditions for stronger, more respectful relationships. By evening, the sunlight had softened into a muted glow, and I felt a quiet readiness, a confidence in my ability to navigate these delicate family dynamics with poise, integrity, and clarity, understanding that measured, thoughtful engagement could transform tension and disappointment into opportunities for growth, meaningful connection, and enduring respect. I moved through the house one last time, ensuring that every space reflected care and intention, reinforcing the message that consistency, composure, and thoughtful attention to detail foster trust and create an environment where family members are more likely to engage openly, listen actively, and respond thoughtfully, allowing relationships to deepen and flourish over time. As twilight began to settle over the neighborhood, I remained in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting a warm light across the carefully arranged space. I sipped from my cup of tea and allowed my thoughts to wander over the events of the past days, reflecting on the ways in which subtle patterns of behavior had emerged and the insights they had offered into Jessica's priorities and the dynamics of the family. I considered the conversations I planned to initiate, thinking carefully about how to express my observations and feelings with clarity and empathy, ensuring that each word conveyed both honesty and respect. I moved through the room, straightening cushions, arranging flowers, and adjusting small details that contributed to a sense of order and welcome, recognizing that environment plays an essential role in shaping interactions and emotional tone. I reminded myself that the goal was not to force immediate change, but to create conditions where thoughtful reflection and meaningful dialogue could take place, allowing for a gradual restoration of trust and understanding. I reviewed my notes once more, identifying key points and moments where natural opportunities for discussion might arise, and I visualized the conversations unfolding calmly and constructively, each exchange reinforcing the values of attentiveness, respect, and shared responsibility. As I observed the quiet movements of the house, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the distant sounds of birds settling for the evening, and the soft creak of the floorboards, I felt a sense of steadiness, a reassurance that deliberate preparation and mindful observation provided a foundation for productive engagement. I considered the importance of empathy, acknowledging that while actions had sometimes suggested a lack of attention or priority, there could be underlying pressures or commitments affecting behavior, and approaching these situations with understanding would foster a more constructive dialogue. I planned to focus on modeling the behaviors and attitudes I valued, demonstrating consistency, attentiveness, and thoughtful engagement, creating a space where openness and reflection were encouraged without imposing demands or expectations. The quiet of the evening allowed me to reflect on the broader patterns of family life, the ways in which shared responsibilities and mutual consideration build strong connections, and the role of calm, deliberate action in maintaining harmony and trust. I spent time preparing small gestures that could reinforce these lessons, from thoughtfully arranged meals to casual opportunities for conversation, each act designed to encourage connection and mutual respect. As darkness deepened outside, I felt a quiet confidence in my approach, understanding that patience, empathy, and clear communication would guide interactions and foster understanding over time. I walked slowly through the house, ensuring that each space reflected care and intentionality, reinforcing the environment I wanted to cultivate for meaningful dialogue. I reminded myself that lasting change is achieved through measured, consistent, and thoughtful actions, and that by maintaining composure, attentiveness, and empathy, I could navigate the complex dynamics of family relationships, encouraging engagement and understanding while preserving my own sense of dignity and self-respect. By the time I settled back into the armchair near the window, I felt a renewed sense of readiness, aware that each careful step I took, each observation I made, and each thoughtful conversation I prepared for, would contribute to strengthening bonds, fostering clarity, and nurturing an environment of trust, respect, and enduring connection within the family.